I remember the very last Thanksgiving I celebrated with my grandmother. It was one of the only Thanksgivings that I shared with her. I grew up in California and she lived up here in Washington. We spent every holiday in California with my dad's family, who were just 15 minutes away from our house. No one wanted the hassle of travel over the holidays, and my dad didn't and still doesn't fly. So we didn't travel to Washington for Thanksgiving. When my husband Eric and I moved up here after college, we were planning to spend many Christmases and Thanksgivings with my grandparents. That did not happen. We had one of each. I don't remember the Christmas, I don't know why, but the Thanksgiving stands out in my mind as clear as if it happened yesterday. My grandmother was tired by this time in her life, slowing down, getting ready to die, although we didn't know it at the time. She was a proud woman who kept an organized house. She knew that she would not be able to be on her feet much during the Thanksgiving preparations, but that didn't mean that she was going to let her organizational standards slip. She spent the whole week before Thanksgiving pulling out her china dishes, and in each dish she put a slip of paper that said something like mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans. This was to ensure that none of her family mistook the potato dish for the stuffing dish. Her plans were meticulous. She created order for herself and her family when other aspects of her life were spinning out of control. Her health was deteriorating, and she couldn't stop that from happening. Her toes, ravaged from diabetes, were in constant pain, and the taking on and off of her socks was almost more than she could bear. She couldn't change that either. But she could make sure that even if she wasn't the one up on her feet, that Thanksgiving went exactly according to plan. And that Thanksgiving was filled with so many plans, some that could come to fruition. All of the menu items were put in the correct dish that day. My grandmother made sure of it from her perch at the dining room table. And some plans that never materialized. My plan was it would be the first of many Thanksgivings with my grandmother, and that didn't happen. Plans can be like that. There are so many familiar sayings, like the best laid plans. By failing to prepare, you prepare to fail. That one's from Benjamin Franklin. Or this one from Eleanor Roosevelt. It takes as much energy to wish as it does to plan. Or, and this is my favorite of the day, from author J.R.R. Tolkien, it does not do to leave a live dragon out of your calculations if you live near one. Don't say, I've never given you good advice from the pulpit, right? If you live near a live dragon, factor that into your plans. This time of year, we are especially dependent on plans. Who has their Christmas list already written? Oh, we're not a congregation of planners here. Okay, well, who has their calendar carefully marked out for the month of December? A few more hands, right? Is it already starting to fill up? I know mine is. It's a little ironic that at the busiest time of year, the time of year where planning is essential to surviving the season, that we begin Advent with a reading that tells us we will not know, will not be able to put on our calendars or count down the days towards the time when Jesus will come again. Advent, the season leading up to Christmas, is a season of waiting, not just to celebrate the birth of Jesus as a human being, but to anticipate the time when Jesus will come again. We know when we will celebrate the birth. Many of us have Advent calendars like the ones I brought up with the kids that are counting down the days in yummy chocolates or fancy teas. But the people waiting for the Messiah in the first century did not know the time of the Messiah's birth. We're told stars and angels marked the signs. A poor woman in an outback town received a prophecy that she was carrying the Son of God. She might have been able to count the days. Well, she probably actually did count the days, right? As every pregnant woman everywhere has done as they're getting near the end of their term. But as for the rest of Israel, the birth of the Messiah was still a cosmic mystery. And the coming of Christ again is still a cosmic mystery. Jesus is clear. We are not meant to know the date of the return of Christ. In this, we can join with the people of the ancient world who trusted in God's promise, but did not know when that promise would manifest itself here on earth. Advent is a season where we might feel especially near to our ancestors who were keeping faith while they waited. It is interesting that both of our scriptures we read today use the phrase "stay awake" or "awake from sleeping." There is a sense of urgency and alertness in these passages. Salvation is nearer than when we first became believers, Paul says. And Jesus reminds us that if we remain awake, we must remain awake in case the thief steals into our house at night. For a moment, just a moment, let's sink into the absurd and imagine the idea of staying awake, actually awake, until Jesus' return. It has been over 2,000 years since his death, and he isn't here yet. Many of us will not even stay awake past the afternoon nap after church today. I won't ask for a show of hands about who has that on their plans for the day. And some of us might even take a nap during church when the preacher gets especially long-winded. Obviously, this is not a literal staying awake. In the same way, we cannot plan for the coming of Jesus, and we cannot count the days on a calendar. We cannot stay awake all night waiting. We cannot know when or exactly what the coming will be. So how do we prepare? We have to separate the notion of preparing and planning. So often preparing and planning mean the same things to us. In order to be prepared, we have to have good plans. To prepare for Christmas, we might make our list, put date stamps on it, check it off as it goes. If we're having people over on December 25th, we're going to buy our groceries around the 22nd or 23rd. We might start making pies on the 24th. We might set the table the day before our guests arrive. We might even make a time schedule for the actual day. Roast in the oven at 3, eat by 4. But preparing is something different, especially when we're talking about spiritual preparation. It involves less checklists and counting down and more being alert to the world and moments that are around us all the time. What if staying awake or waking up was about noticing God in the everyday moments all around us, in the messiness of life, in the overturned plans, in the checklists that didn't get checked? What if preparing during the Advent season was a complete reorientation of our lives towards the dawning of God's tender mercies all around us? What if preparing was about learning to see the coming of Jesus into our world in the here and now? Signs of the second coming, like the stars and angels that marked Jesus' birth. Our traditions around this time of year are all about planning. We have even turned Advent calendars into a type of planning, marking the days and counting down until Christmas Day. Even if we reach back into the tradition of Advent calendars as markers to tell the story of Christmas rather than just dispensers of treats every day, there's still this idea of counting down towards a fixed date. But what if we engaged in the tradition of Advent calendars with more of a sense of wonder this year? What if each day was a reminder to look for the blessings of God present in the here and now? What if the chocolate or the tea or whatever your Advent calendar dispenses becomes a reminder to be awake to the gifts of God all around? Perhaps we need to start a reverse Advent calendar where each day we write down one thing we notice about God at work. God showing God's self, one act of kindness or wonder or tiny miracle or tender mercy, and we place it into the calendar instead of just taking that treat out. Jesus, in his admonition on the coming of the Son of Man, warns that some will miss it. It sounds so ominous. 2 will be in the field, and only 1 will be taken up. 2 will be grinding grain, and only 1 will remain. This is often interpreted quite literally, as if there will be a time when we are beamed up straight into heaven. Maybe that will be what the coming of the Son of Man looks like. But Jesus rarely speaks about God's ways without using metaphor, parable, or symbolism. What if the image that Jesus is giving here to us actually means that 2 people might be working together in the field, and 1 will recognize the harvest as a gift from God, see the beauty in the grain, offer a moment of gratitude, extend a helping hand to her friend to carry in the harvest, see the image of God in her friend's smile? What if that woman has been drawn up into heaven while she is here on earth in those moments of wonder and seeing the good gifts that God has placed all around her? What if she has an encounter with the kingdom of God, has seen its coming, seen the star and angel sign in the sacredness of that moment? Keep awake. Salvation is nearer than when we first became believers. Yes, because as we believe that God is with us, as we trust in the promises of God more than in our own plans, we begin to awake to the salvation that is here and now. When I think back to that last Thanksgiving with my grandmother, I realize how holy that meal was. Not because the cranberry sauce was in the correct dish. That might have made it holy for my grandmother. But because I shared that meal with my grandmother for the last time. Because her hand was in all of the small details of the table. Because she loved us enough to care about the preparations of our Thanksgiving meal. Because she gave the best of herself to our time together. The message of Advent is to prepare for the coming of Christ into the world. And the Christmas story itself can help us prepare. Jesus came into the world in a manger, in a backwater town, to a poor family. His coming reminds us that everything is sacred. There is nothing that is set apart from God. Not a stable with straw and animals, not a couple who lives in poverty, not a town that no one had heard of before Jesus was born there, not a Thanksgiving table where a grandmother and granddaughter will share a Thanksgiving meal for the last time. Nothing is set apart from God. The message of Advent is to prepare for the coming of Christ. But the message of Christmas is that God is here with us. And so our preparations are not about waiting for a time to come, but seeing how it has come here and now. When we begin to claim this as truth, we become awake to it, and we can see the dawning from on high of God's tender mercies everywhere. May this Advent season be sacred, not because of your plans and your to-do lists or how much you get done. May it be sacred because this is a blessed time of year, a time to notice with intention that God is with us. May you see the sacred in the faces of the people scurrying to buy Christmas presents at the mall. May you see the sacred in the boxes of the Advent calendar that mark time towards the Christmas celebration. May you see the sacred around tables when you gather with friends or family for a meal. May you see the sacred everywhere and all the time. May you be wide awake and filled with the awe and wonder of God with us. Amen.